This is Hobby Talks, a podcast series exploring politics and policy-focused conversations with experts, scholars, and those guiding the most complex issues facing our region and state. This podcast is a production from the Hobby School of Public Affairs in partnership with the Center for Student Media at the University of Houston. In this episode, Hobby Talks host Chris Bronk discusses the role of opinion journalism in the region with Evan Mintz of the Houston Chronicle.
Welcome to Hobby Talks. I'm Chris Bronk, Associate Professor at the Hobby School of Public Affairs. In this episode, I'm joined by Evan Mintz of the Houston Chronicle to dive into the role of opinion journalism in Houston and how the opinion pages shape civic discourse in an evolving media landscape and an increasingly polarized world. Evan is the editor of opinion and community engagement at the Houston Chronicle. He oversees the Chronicle's editorial board and opinion pages, which cover pressing issues facing our region. Evan has told me he is partisan for one thing, and that's Houston. That's right?
Yes, that's it.
So please tell me why you're partisan for Houston.
I think that over the past several decades, we've seen decline of local media and rise of national media just as a result of the fact that your for-profit press, the business model is no longer functional in the way that it used to be. People are not taking out advertising in print publications. So much of this has moved online. And so we've seen local newspapers start to collapse, and we've seen national media grow as a result. But what that means is that people are talking about things from the perspective of reporters who are based in New York City or Washington, D.C., or San Francisco. And maybe during election season, you've got some folks, say, pushing on the issues in Iowa and New Hampshire. But Houston gets vastly overlooked. We are not a city of media. We never have been. And it is something inherent, I think, in our economy that we really rely on oil and gas. And the oil and gas industry does not need media coverage to make money. In fact, if someone shows up with a reporter pad or a camera to an oil and gas company, it's probably because something went wrong.
Right.
You know, people are going to buy plastics and petroleum and all sorts of oil products, whether they know it or not. In contrast to a city like San Francisco, its economy is based on tech. And you kind of got to convince some people sometimes to buy the coolest, latest whiz-bang thing. And so there's developed this relationship with media and a lot of sort of inherent navel-gazing and self-reflection in the region because of that Houston does not have. And I really want to make sure that we are thinking about ourselves and talking about ourselves and not just a national perspective, because if you try to take local issues and sort them into a red versus blue, D versus R dynamic that you really get out of DC and the national press, it's not going to fit. It's not going to make a lot of sense. And you're going to find yourself thinking about things and advocating for things that aren't necessarily good for the region. Let me give you a good example. You know, we do our endorsements during election season. We have candidates show up and talk about why they think they're the right people for certain races. And I have encountered several Democrats who say they want to ban fracking. Well, I'm sorry, but here in Houston, basically you're saying that we need to declare bankruptcy. No, we're not going to ban fracking. I've had Republicans show up and talk about how they want to stop immigration and they like tariffs on trade. Like, well, Houston is a port city, and we really rely on immigration to keep our economy going and flow critical jobs in the energy industry and the medical industry and all sorts of things around the region. So, no, those are not good ideas for Houston. Yeah. And if you look at candidates in our past who represented Houston, they were able to articulate the things that were specifically important to us, and we're starting to lose that. And I want to make sure that people don't forget it.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. It is remarkable that a city this big does not have, say, the same media footprint of others in the United States. Mm-hmm. And there's just almost like, Houston is a sprawling place now that is like the size of Massachusetts. So you're really speaking not to a city, but to a macro region. And, we ourselves look at what Austin is telling us as a university, and the University of Houston. There are four big state schools in Texas, right? You've got Tech way out there, and we don't think about them because we're way out there. And then Tech doesn't think about us, and even though we have a reciprocal relationship as schools, like we do some work together on different programs. Largely because they're out there and we're here, and like we can back up data there and stuff. And then we have the big boys. We have A&M and UT.
Right.
And, we see these state mandates coming down on schools And we're Houston. We kind of feel like we're different in a way because we're not part of this state culture. We're more part of a city culture. So that city culture piece, and I agree with you completely on immigration. As FDR said in his first public speech to the Daughters of the American Revolution, my fellow immigrants. And, we are now prohibited by Austin in hiring professorial candidates who require an H-1B visa.
Right.
And I can tell you that this is a campus where I really enjoy that we have 2 Japanese faculty members in my department. It feels pretty interesting. There is a Greek mafia, pardon me for saying it, but there are Greek faculty members around our campus in all the different departments. And they're like, when pressed, they'll admit, yes, we feel we invented science. So thank you.
And democracy.
And democracy. Though it's just some small ideas. So the thing, we got to go over some brass tacks stuff. I know what an editorial board does because my mama was a newspaper woman and was always very busy. And I think my dad got more parenting responsibilities at some point because of that. What does the editorial board do? What is the vision for what an opinion editor is? What do you guys think when you go to work every day?
So editorial boards are this interesting creation. And then the idea of an opinion section in a newspaper overall in the year 2026 is interesting because you were to explain the business case of like paying for a newspaper, paying for your news. It's pretty straightforward. Like you give money to a newspaper, they give money to a reporter, and the reporter discovers stuff about the world you live in that you didn't know otherwise. In an opinion section, though, it's a little different because right now on the internet, there's so much opinion and it is free. And so how do you make the case to people that they should be paying for something that otherwise they feel like they can get for free? At the same time, I can look out in the world and see that people are paying for Substacks. They're paying for podcasts. Clearly, folks see a financial interest somehow in connecting with reporting in conversation that isn't straight up news.
Yes.
And so that is what the opinion section is supposed to provide. And we are trying to show that we can provide an opinion worth paying for. And in Houston, a city that doesn't do a lot of self-reflection, that is going to mean talking about Houston. That means talking about what is happening here in terms of policy and culture and arts and just the experience of being here. The idea is that if you read the opinion section, you will be able to talk about the place where you live in a very smart, informed way. In a way where on the news side, you're getting your who, what, where, when, why, how. On the opinion section, you are getting the should, or you're getting the places where different values lead people to look at these facts and come to different conclusions. And so that is what the big picture goal of this opinion section is. We also want to try to find ways to plug Houston into the national conversation so that we don't get overlooked as a region. If there are big debates going on about things that Houston has insight into, like energy and immigration and trade and growth, we want to try to find ways to get op-eds, which are things written by people from outside the paper, opposite editorials, things in the paper that will somehow connect us to the national press, whether it's because we are writing in a way for that audience or we're taking someone from a national audience and bringing them down here to build that connection. So it's not just a bunch of people who barely leave Brooklyn talking about what the impact of tariffs are going to be on the world's most, or one of the world's most important ports. And so that is what we try to do. But the opinion section publishes sort of 3 different types of content. You have your op-eds, your outside pieces. You have your letters to the editor, which are people who will read the newspaper and then tell us what they think about it. And I really like those. It is a way we can run a back and forth conversation in ways that you don't always get with other media outlets.
Yeah.
And then the editorials. And those are unsigned pieces by the editorial board. And that is a group of writers who are supposed to represent the institutional voice of the paper. And it's almost like being a judge in many ways. What has our precedent been? What has our perspective been historically? And we want to keep applying new facts to those perspectives, to those values, to understand what it is that we think should be happening in Houston. And it used to be that editorial boards really were just the publisher of the paper kind of ruminating on the issues of the day. I have a book of old Hearst newspaper editorials from like the early 20th century. And it's just someone, maybe William Randolph Hearst himself, just talking about how like, oh man, people these days are dressing weird. What's up with that? It's very like hot takes.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like tweets of the past sort of thing. But now editorials really are more focused on policy, on trying to shape the conversation, and really trying to remind folks of what that Houston perspective should be on issues of national importance, but also what's going on at City Hall and Commissioner's Court and around the region. And right now, some of the things that we're really focusing on, beyond just trying to make sure that the Houston economy keeps remaining robust and growing and successful and is able to weather and change this energy growth and transition that we're going through. We've also picked up a few issues that we think are of real importance right now. Road safety is one of them. More people are dying in Houston from road crashes than from homicides, but it does not get the same sort of political focus that straight up crime does. And we think that this is something that we want to see, not just road engineers and city policy leaders paying attention to, but prosecutors, and trying to figure out if there's a cultural shift that our city needs to make. So something like that is very important. We are looking at the 250th anniversary of the nation and how Texas fits into that. We are looking, of course, at immigration. This is a region where 1/4 of the people who live here were not born here. And the policy fights we are seeing and the impact on individuals isn't just for people who are here without documentation. It's for people who are legal citizens or legal residents. Like you said, is impacting people who want H-1B visas to work here. It is on families that are mixed status, where some have documentation and some don't. And historically, local Houston politicians understood the nuance of this. There's this great speech from George H.W. Bush back when he was running for president in 1980, where he said, people come here and they're good people and they work hard, and poorly written laws turn them into criminals. And we have a duty to change these laws so that they can be, under the law, the good people we know they are. You don't hear that type of rhetoric from Houstonians as much anymore. And I think it's because so much of politics is driven not from a Houston perspective, but from a national perspective. And you really want to try to find those local voices who can speak to the reality of how national rhetoric hurts or helps our city. We're also looking at energy transition, energy growth, and what that means for our oil and gas industry here. And we're also just thinking about a lot of quality of life issues in Houston because we don't think about ourselves. We don't talk about ourselves. A lot of the day-to-day experience of being a Houstonian kind of glides under the radar, whether it is trash pickup and illegal dumping, whether it is the city budget, whether it is the bizarre structures that we have of overlapping city and county agencies. They're all doing the same thing. We want to bring a lot of attention to those issues where we see problems, we see solutions, but we don't see people talking about it.
So I recall my cousin was also in the periodical publication industry. She was one of the new hires right out of college at Highlights magazine, and she got their letters to the editor.
Yeah,
and it was always like, why is this way? By Gwen, age 6, and she said it was the best part of her job, hands down. There was always a surprise in the pile. I want to keep this about the paper to a large degree. The immigration thing is, we are a city of I'm an internal immigrant to Houston. I came here on a 1-year leave from the State Department in 2006, and other than 9 months spent on sabbatical last year, I spent most of the year out of the country, and then came back. Which people were taking bets on after I left. They're like, hey, but I have now lived in a Western country that has a higher standard of living than here, for a variety of reasons. We think about people, what they struggle with in Houston, and my big gripe getting older is always now health insurance stuff, and like health insurance stuff for my now 21-year-old kid, things you don't ever think about with your children, but this is something you'll have to do someday with your kids, is I want to explain the explanation of benefits and why you can't have that pill now. I mean, I never really thought of that as a parental responsibility that I would have to pick up. But so you're bullish on Houston. I I knew you when you were at Rice because your back page editors lampooned the course I did with Moshe Vardi on computing and society and reduced it to a course that was, I believe, lampooned on your back page as the sex with robots class. Kyle Barnhart, wherever he is, I think that was his. And he was a great student in the class, but he was a real wise guy. And one of your classmates, I believe, one of your back page guys.
He did the back page right after me, so I handed it off to him.
Okay. So, we live in a city that has attracted talent. And when I go to other places in the world, I see like New Zealand is having this exodus. Mm-hmm. Why? Because their economy produces cheese and wine, which is great on Friday afternoon. But you can't really build, and wool for sweaters. So sweaters, cheese, and wine.
And tourism.
And lots of tourism. And the thing I dislike about going to New Zealand in our time is, but this is where Sauron did the thing. Really? We're going to talk about it's a geological, never mind. It's like, yes, it does look otherworldly. But anyway, bringing it back, what do you think should, you are bullish on Houston.
Yes.
What do you think should bring people here? And what does Houston, and this is kind of, we think about should a lot at the hobby school because we're saying, if we make a policy, if we incentivize a thing, it could happen. What are your thoughts on, what you care about personally and how that kind of maps forward to a place that will continue to have the success it's had, certainly in the 20 years that I've lived here?
I think the thing that Houston has had for out its entire existence is that it is a city of opportunity, that people are moving there for work. They're not moving here for the weather. They're not moving here. It's nice not to say that the weather is all that bad. That's a thing I've been hearing from some sort of the downtown Illuminati folks, that they're sick and tired of folks complaining about the weather. You could go to Madison, Wisconsin, and it'll be way too cold half the year. Like, at least here you get some nice times.
Right.
But that being said, like, Houston is a city for business. People move here for work.
Right.
And because of that, we have allowed people to come here and thrive. We have kept the cost of housing low. We have kept opportunity costs for doing business low. We welcome that. We have not had zoning. We have not had a lot of regulations. And because of that, we have allowed growth to accumulate, wealth to accumulate, and make this a place where anyone can move to and they can do well. And I was at the Texas Tribune Festival last year. There's a meeting of some venture fund investors who were talking about why they're bullish on Texas overall. And I sort of raised my hand and I asked, I hear what you're saying about all this pro-business stuff, but if I look at the state, and a lot of this applies to the city too, I worry about flooding. I worry about climate change. I worry that we're not making enough investments in the infrastructure we need for the next generation. I worry about education. I worry about how this anti-immigration policy we're getting out of D.C. is going to hurt our growth. I worry about declining relations with Mexico are going to hurt our growth and hurt trade. Like, how can you look at all this and be so bullish? And they said, we see all the same things you do. Like, don't get us wrong. We are aware of these concerns, but you don't have to compare yourself to the ideal. You have to compare yourself to the next best state. And if you're comparing Texas, and Houston is part of that, to say California or New York, those are states where if someone comes in and says they want to start a new business, they want to do something new, the response from leaders, whether at a state level or a local community level, is no. Like, we really don't want you to come here. You have to fight to do something new, to start a new business. In Texas, we largely welcome that. We want you to come here. I'm the person annoyingly telling everyone they should move to Houston, move here. But the thing that these investors were concerned about is something they called the dark woke. It was like right-wing political leaders and activists who would rather our state be less economically successful, be smaller, weaker, poorer, dumber, if it meant they got wins on social issues. And we're seeing that definition now move into issues of demographics, of a state that is less diverse, that looks more how they want it to look.
Right.
And they're willing to sacrifice these economic gains for that. And I think we saw the governor do that with his decision to put a halt on H-1B visa hires. And so that is the thing I worry about long term. I also worry that Houston has been successful because we haven't had a lot of unnecessary government regulation on growth. We've never had zoning. We've had other things.
Yeah.
And we used to be mocked for that. We were like a big, sprawling, ugly city. And now from from coast to coast, you were seeing a lot of these YIMBY, yes, in my backyard groups, and realizing like, hey, maybe Houston was onto something there.
Yeah.
Maybe they figured out like it's okay to build a whole lot of housing. We want that. The problem with Houston is that we ended up here accidentally. It wasn't particularly intentional in many ways. So we lack the muscle memory or sense of immediacy to say, we need to keep doing this. This is one of our strengths. There is not a YIMBY movement in Houston the way that there is in Dallas or Austin. So there's no one out there really pushing to eliminate parking minimums, to eliminate unnecessary setback requirements, to cut a lot of the red tape and streamline a lot of the permitting, and look at a lot of the stuff we put in instead of zoning, like deed restrictions, and say, to what extent are deed restrictions causing harm in our region?
Yeah.
It is the sort of thing that prevents you from buying that corner lot in a neighborhood and saying, I want to put a little coffee shop here. Even if it would make financial sense, even if it would make business sense, that gets in the way. So that is something we have to start looking at rigorously. But we don't have the instinct for that. And we kind of lucked out that the state did some pro-housing bills that are going to apply to us in many ways, so we don't have to work too hard at it. But there's this sense in Houston sometimes that like a good neighborhood looks like a suburb because that is where we've allowed a lot of housing to be built. And so if you look at our closer in inner loop urban neighborhoods, it is hard to build a dense walkable neighborhood in a way that would develop organically if you didn't have regulations there that made it look like a suburban neighborhood. And efforts to try to tear those down have been getting a lot of pushback. It's been really tough because this is a city that, because we don't do a lot of navel gazing, often lacks for vision.
Right.
There's not a clear articulation in many ways of what it is that we want Houston to look like. Just kind of let it go automatically. And often that works pretty well.
Yeah.
But in this moment right now, we need something. And try on the editorial board in the opinion section to present that vision of what we would want Houston to look like in 5, 10, 20, 50 years.
It seems very important to have that vision. And yes, the city did sprawl because of the way it was built. When I first moved here, I kind of said, well, this isn't really a city. It's just a really, really big suburb that goes in every direction. And this was 20 years ago. And one of the things that you measure, I'm now at an age where like I can remember when ideas were rolled out. So when I lived in DC in 2005, it was the Silver Line will be here soon in 2023. And I'd go, 2023 sounds like a very, very... Well, last month I was in DC. I rode the Silver Line twice. Perfectly good subway train.
Yeah.
And no, this isn't going to be the lead into why does Houston need trains? Tori Gaddis is my friend. He's the anti-train guy who's always writing his Houston strategies on more cars.
I agree with him on some things, and I disagree with him on other things. And I will say one of the points he and Bill King, who's another similar thinker, make about Houston is that we just don't have the density to accommodate mass transit. And I'd say that's not true, because mass transit does not move in a shape. It moves in a line.
Yes.
And so if I am drawing a shape around Houston and say, well, this is the density of the region and it is not enough, like, no, you have to draw a line. Yeah. And you have to say, I can draw a line through Houston that has pretty high density along it, that has homes and commercial and jobs. Like, I can make that and it can work. You can look at like the 82 bus route, which is the Westheimer bus. And it has the highest ridership of any bus route in the state. And you could look at that and say we could get even more people on that if we made sure that the parts of the city that it went through actually looked like a city and allowed even more density to develop, because clearly people want to live there. You can look at the housing prices. People want to live here. And we can look at the number of people who get on that bus and say, if we turn this into a light rail system, we turned into a BRT, if we gave these buses signal prioritization so they didn't stop at red lights and they went faster than the cars they were next to, more people would be taking that. This would be a successful system. Like, it is absolutely possible to do that, but you need a clear articulation of what it is we're trying to do and how do we do it. So it's not just Houston needs more transit, Houston doesn't need more transit. It's there are places where transit currently works well in the city. We could make it work even better in the city, and places where there isn't transit where we should be adding it because it would work for the same reasons.
Right.
But Houston is not a place that likes to have these sorts of deep conversations.
Right. No, and anything that seems to embrace a long-term plan. And I don't know where that comes from. I don't know if it's the boom bust cycle of Houston. I mean, we may boom in the next year, which will be interesting. Well, the country bleeds on the energy issue, and it's interesting. Having watched Washington grow up and working in Washington on and off for many years, when you fly into National Airport, you can see the metro system, the underground train system, because there is clutch of bigger buildings and taller urban looking places. Every Northern Virginia, every couple thousand meters, there's this new mini city thing. And it's because that's where the train runs. And Japan, when I spent time there, it was no different. It's like, oh, they're going to put in a subway stop here. Well, we're going to make a mini city here.
Right.
That's what people want. So we don't have. We already have the mini cities.
Yeah, we just don't run a lot of transit to them. And part of that is just we didn't think this through. Like if you look at the red line where our light rail system is, or even the green and purple lines which come by UH, when those were built, if you had a building next to one of those stops, you could not build that density because you would have to build a certain amount of parking for it. You would have to have a setback requirement for it. There may have been a deed restriction that applied to that said you cannot build a tall tower here.
Right.
So Houston didn't plan through in a way to say like, oh, we need to allow developers to build what would make sense here. We might have zoning, but we have all sorts of other red tape.
Right.
And the efforts to cut it, because there's so many different ways of getting at it, aren't as easy as just saying, oh, we should just upzone here, problem solved.
Right, which other cities do.
Right. And then we also have the problem of property taxes, which disincentivize development, because if you put new development there, so then you have to pay a whole lot more property taxes on this lot. Sometimes if you own it, it makes financial sense for you to just keep that an empty lot. Or turn it into single family homes you can flip and then just don't have to worry about.
Yeah.
And then whoever owns that home will have a homestead exemption that you would not have if this were a multifamily unit or a mixed use development.
Right.
So we do not have a lot of policies in place to create the type of city that you would expect a big city to start looking like.
Right.
And if you look at one or two of the few places that do look like that in Texas, like Austin has had this booming downtown, but also it has had strict growth restrictions on it dating back to the 70s when people opposed building new freeways. So the sprawl was burdensome. It was hard to do sprawl. And they put limits on housing. There's a lot of strict zoning there. And so when they finally did upzone, there was a real relief valve that was opened to allow that to happen. At the same time, you can look at a place like East Austin, which used to be a sort of more working class Hispanic neighborhood, and it all got flipped very quickly because people were looking for housing near downtown, sort of in the city, and that is where capital went to.
Yeah.
In Houston, you still have a lot of poorer, closer in neighborhoods that have not been gentrified or flipped because we created these sponges for capital. We shrunk our minimum lot sizes so you could build townhouses in ways that you couldn't in other cities. So you could pack in more people into one lot rather than having one person buying an old home. You'd have a developer buy one home, turn it into 6 homes, and then save the 5 other old homes from being developed.
Right.
We allowed a lot of residential towers to go up in places where in other cities you would not have been allowed to do that. Those are sponges for capital and soak up a lot of money that otherwise would have gentrified neighborhoods around UH that still really haven't been gentrified.
Right.
And so there's a lot of positivity around that we have seen in Houston that helps preserve the city in ways that I think lead to struggles in other places.
Well, I mean, I think back to the duration of the Tower of Traffic, and I remember grabbing one of those bumper stickers that had the angry-looking building swinging cars around furiously. And it was just a shock to me to see that level of kind of opposition. I mean, obviously a very nice neighborhood. So, Houston has grown unlike any city I've ever seen.
Yes.
When I visited here to interview many years ago, the absence of zoning surprised me. It's like driving down 59. It's like, oh, that's the biggest mega church in America. That's the biggest adult bookstore in America. That's the biggest Maserati dealership in America. It just one after it was all lined up, and I think there was something odd about it, but kind of appealing. I mean, that the city could just embrace as many and very liberating. It's like people do what people want to do here.
Right.
and that dark woke thing you spoke of, and I think I feel that a little bit. I need to flip to, time is moving along. As my colleague Alan says often in our meetings, I'm going to change the subject. So we've had some elections.
Yes.
I want to talk generally about one thing, and then kind of pick your brain a bit about what you see coming. So first off, Houston, Harris County, I believe, has the longest ballot in the country. Is this still true? And what do you think that has to do with our elections?
That is my understanding, though I've heard that at times the LA and Los Angeles, they have a really long one too, because you have your counties and your cities, but also all of your weird California propositions and a lot of bizarre elected positions there. So they get a similar situation. In Harris County, we have tons of elected positions, largely judicial. We elect all of our judges. We've got 5 million people in the county. We keep on adding new judgeships to keep up with growth, and we probably need to add a whole lot more too. And so you're going to vote for all those people. And so it makes for a very long ballot.
Do you think it's an unreasonable critique for people to say make the ballot shorter?
No, not at all. Okay. As someone, I joined the Houston Chronicle, graduated law school, passed the bar, worked in the prosecutor's office here in Harris County. I didn't like it. I lucked my way into a position to help out the editorial board with these endorsements, because the person who had run the judicial endorsements, who would meet all the judicial candidates and endorse them and write up who we think is good and why. I joined to help them out because I had a legal background. I kind of stuck around for a while. And I would go in and vote, and I would not remember, and I met all of the people. And we created this system of electing judges after Reconstruction, and we did not have as many judges on a ballot now. It's gotten very unwieldy. And so it really is important for when people vote to look at, I'd like to say, our endorsements first. These are Chronicle endorsements, but the Houston Bar reviews candidates and rates them. There are also other organizations out there that try to do serious jobs. And honestly, on these judgeships, it's rating 2 people who are like probably reasonably qualified. Often it's a challenger against an incumbent, and we go, well, there's no real reason to fire this person. So the other person's good too. They'd probably be a good judge. I've had moments when after the primaries, you get to the general election, a D and an R sitting next to each other, and we ask them, well, like, why should we endorse you and not the other person? And they would say, oh, I don't really have an answer. Like, they're really good. And they're like, yeah, this other person's good too. They're friends, but they know that a D or an R is going to win. And they're just glad that they made it out of primaries where they're facing candidates who were not as well qualified. And they think that voters will be well served no matter who's there. Right. And there aren't huge policy differences between them. But when you've got, 100 pages on this ballot of candidates to get through, if you don't have that endorsement list in front of you, in the general election, at the very least, you can think to yourself, well, if I'm a Democrat, I'll probably vote for the Democrats, and Republicans will vote for the Republicans. In the primary, you have a whole lot less information in front of you. We just ran a column looking at some of the outcomes in the primaries we just had to say on the Democratic side, the best way to win one of these primaries is just to be a woman or have a woman's name. And because you can just say that, you can see that they did better, that women candidates do better. And it's harder to overcome that because women are more likely to turn out in the Democratic primary, and they're more likely to vote for other women. That's just how it goes. Candidates with Hispanic last names often do well, depending on who is turning out in elections and which primary you're in. Right. You're just going to get that. People aren't necessarily voting for folks based on their qualifications, or even because there's no identifiers about their party. When you're running in a primary, no way to know much about them in that booth unless you bring something with you. And you see in other states, they have other ways of running these judicial endorsements or judicial elections, whether it is through just appointing them. You get a gubernatorial appointment, like you do at a federal level. You have systems where you have appointment and then retention elections, where you vote and say, should this person keep staying a judge? And then if not, then you go to an election. Right. There's been calls for eliminating the partisanship on the judicial elections in November so that it's not D versus R. And the idea of that as well, then people will really have to learn more about the judges. I worry it'll just lead to people voting for familiar names, or we'd have the same issues that we have in these primaries. And so we've seen more and more kind of defense of our partisan election of judges when faced with the reality of how difficult it would be to transition to an alternative that would not result in giving all of the power to the governor,
Right.
Or removing the last bit of information that people have about candidates on the November ballot.
Okay.
And so if I were, king, and you told me like you get all of your powers, but you can only remake the way we elect judges, and then when it's done, all your kingly powers get taken away, I would probably come up with a system where it's almost like the way that the Supreme Court of Israel selects its candidates, which is you have like former judges, a diverse spectrum of representatives from like a legislative body. I'd probably have it from like Commissioner's Court, members of the bar. That's kind of what you have. And then they come up with a list of candidates. And then like someone gets picked from that list.
Right.
And I think that might be a good way to try to do it. At the same time, if you had a lot of these institutional voices picking the judges, you wouldn't get a lot of the new interesting candidates we got, particularly in 2018, who pushed for some much needed reforms, the way that, say, our bail system worked in misdemeanor courts, where people were getting held for days, if not weeks, not because they posed any danger to anyone or not because they were like massive offenders, but because they just didn't have money for bail.
Right.
And we only really changed that because there's a big sweep of candidates. And if you just said, well, who are the institutional voices who are well respected and who would they pick? They might not pick the sort of judges willing to make those changes.
And it's remarkable how much the partisanship can affect the equation going down the ballot. Briefly, I lived in Fort Bend County, where all the municipal elections are non-party kind of denominated. It made for a lot more work. And fortunately, I had a neighbor who was formerly the head of the hobby school board. And she told me things in describing candidates that I couldn't believe. Like, well, he got disbarred, but he's a good guy. And I was like, okay, I'm in a different place. This is a different kind of... Now, we're going to have elections this fall. We're going to have elections in May.
Yes.
We're seeing runoffs happen in a lot of places.
Runoffs. We have a City of Houston special election for District C. We just met with the candidates in that race, and that's a nonpartisan election. And then we're going to have the elections in November, presuming Trump has made some gestures contrary to that, but we'll hopefully we'll still have elections. Okay,
well, yeah, and I think so. The kind of related question, and I'm not going to. Is Texas going to be more blue? Is it going to be more red? But the question I really have is Harris County and Houston resilient to, let's say, disruptions in the electoral process coming from Washington or elsewhere?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
That's a very good question. I don't know.
Okay.
It's one of the... Throughout my life, I've heard well-intentioned libertarians argue that they want to see small government because even good policies that grow government power could be misused by malicious actors, and they are far too worried about that. And I'd sit there and I think, well, yeah, hypothetically, but like, who's going to use grants to universities as like a string to pull to try to get their malicious political ends enacted? It's just like to fund research. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
Turns out I was wrong. Turns out a lot of the libertarians were right, and that we are seeing a White House that is willing to use every lever of power that it could possibly imagine in front of it to try to shape outcomes to its ends, no matter what the potential negative effects would be for our country or for our functioning republic. And so listening to what President Trump has said about elections, just casting doubt on outcomes, and not just in the kind of sore loser next day way, but in real ways to try to test our judicial system and our election system, and to try to use his power to punish his political enemies who spoke the truth that elections were not stolen from him, that he lost in 2020. It is scary in some ways. And you have to rely in many manners in the like good graces of the people in these offices to do the right thing. And I think it's what we saw in 2020 in Georgia and Arizona. And you hope that you see it in Harris County and Texas overall. Before I had this stint at a think tank, a policy philanthropy, Arnold Ventures. As I was at the Chronicle, I left after I had my first kid, and now I'm back. And in the 2020 election, they gave a grant to the Police Foundation, which does kind of policy by law enforcement professionals for law enforcement professionals, to create a list of best practices of how law enforcement should act on election day if there is questionable outcomes, if there are debates about what the outcome actually is, if there is chaos. And it's a lot of telling police, stay out of election sites, don't go in there, that's not your job. Your job is to keep the peace. Your job is to enforce the law. It is not your job to do one thing for one political party or another.
Right.
And that's seemed very straightforward. But we are not necessarily seeing that from a lot of federal law enforcement agencies these days who make their partisanship explicit. And a lot of that trickles down as well. I remember after 9/11, after the Iraq War, George W. Bush spent no shortage of his time talking about how, yes, Al-Qaeda is bad. Yes, ISIS is bad and these Islamic extremists are bad, but Muslims here in America are good people. They're hardworking people. Yeah. They are not your enemy, and they're part of this. And even as the FBI was spying on mosques, even as people were getting their civil rights violated in many ways, there was real value in having a president kind to hold back the dam of fear and hatred that comes naturally to so many people when you are in these moments. And that is something you want from leadership, even as I explicitly disagreed then and disagree now with so many other policy decisions W made. This was a good thing for a president to do. You are not hearing that now from the president. So even if Trump does not do a physical thing to get law enforcement to do something beyond their scope of their proper jobs, to do something inappropriate, he's creating a rhetorical permission structure to get people across the country to act in this way that I think is dangerous and inappropriate. And so sitting here in Harris County, I'd say, I don't know, I'm sitting and watching.
It is unbelievably troubling time. We have a lot of discussions about norms and the breakdown of norms, and I think many of them have broken over time, and it's gotten so that we could rely on people to do the right thing was kind of always the assumption.
We've relied on civic society in many ways, and it's been a strength of America. I think you can even go back and read your Lafayette, and he talks about the importance of churches and the importance of these town hall meetings. And that is sort of the strength of America, that you've in many ways been able to have a weak government because you had strong civic society.
Yeah.
But if civic society is not as strong as it used to be and people are turning to a stronger government to fix their problems for them, I feel like that, again, I have to give credit to my libertarian friends. I read Road to Serfdom now through a lens where I see, I think, what Friedrich Hayek was talking about, that the promise that government can solve all your little problems is going to have people frustrated that government did not solve their problems, and voting for someone stronger and stronger and stronger to just do the thing for them, rather than hearing the honest answer, which is that government can't solve a lot of these problems. That used to be a Republican talking point.
Yeah, governing is hard.
Governing is really hard, and the government is a blunt tool. And, you can do Social Security. We've seen pretty good model on health insurance, if only because the market doesn't really work there all that well.
Right.
But on a lot of other things, government is a blunt and clumsy tool, and the world is filled with subjective experiences and nuance. And the hope that the government will make you happy through the policy decisions that it makes is going to be a dangerous path. And at a certain point, I keep waiting for politicians to stand up and say, I know you want us to fix that problem, and I feel your pain, but government can't do that. Government can't make you happy. It can't make your grandkids talk to you anymore. It can't make it, 1986 again through science or magic.
No.
The world is going to keep moving forward.
It evolves over time, and things do change. I'm reminded of when I look at, I teach the theory of public administration, how bureaucracies work. And it's something we have to teach. I think it's useful. And I have my biases in it. And having been a public servant, I have very clear, like I can have those aha moments of saying, oh, this is a theory, but it's true. And I think one of the things that really struck a chord with my grad students last semester was one of the theoreticians of public management basically said, government is exceedingly good at two things: raising money and spending it. And there is some real truth to that. And maybe I'm thinking about that more because I heard about the spending bonanza. I was a federal employee. I did the fiscal year is coming spend down more than once. And it was literally like, oh, that you're buying that foreign government, that Black Hawk helicopter, that's going to do like 80% of our spend down. Yeah, let's buy the Black Hawk. That's like, that's one line item. They need a helicopter. But we now are, facing down a place where do we know if we're making good decisions? And the thing I wanted to move to, so I spent last year in a foreign country looking at how they deal with the problems of political influence, the problem of political interference, and the issue of disinformation. And now it used to be that, if you read it in the paper, it probably was true. When I worked in the domain of classified information, I remember Governor Tom Kean was doing the post 9/11 review, and we came into all the agencies and read all of the super secret stuff. And he had a meeting at one of the agencies, and it ended up being in a news story. I think that's how I found out about it. And Governor Kean was kind of a beloved figure in the Northeast. He was really well liked, very centrist Republican, was really into New Jersey agriculture. He'd always go on TV and say, "Isn't this delicious corn?" Or whatever.
They grow corn in New Jersey?
Yeah, they have to. They just the crop rotation. They'd rather grow blueberries.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, but crop rotation, I think, was the idea, and that Jersey could do anything, of course. But he had a meeting and he went through all this stuff, and he said, "I already knew all this." And the bureaucrat at the intelligence agency politely said, "Yes, but now you know it's true because the government says so." But do we live in a time now where our public servants are speaking the truth or speaking some truth? How do you sort that as a newspaper?
We have seen pretty explicitly the Department of Homeland Security get called out by judges for not telling the truth about what they're doing in immigration enforcement. And I can go back through U.S. history and point to moments where it can say, well, is the government lying? And did they know they were lying? When the Bush White House was arguing about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, there weren't weapons of mass destruction.
They were lying. I worked at the State Department then.
That was a straight up lie. They weren't like fumbling themselves. Or what about Gulf of Tonkin?
Totally a lie.
Totally a lie. So we knew that ships weren't actually being attacked. It was a total lie. Yeah. So it's not as if there haven't been lies being told by government officials in the past, much as any person in any institution could probably be caught telling a lie at some point. I think a difference of what we're seeing here is just the brazenness and constant lying that we're seeing on things that can be proven otherwise almost immediately. And this attempt to try to shape the world through the lies, and also a belief that people don't care about the lies and believe the lies or don't believe the lies is kind of this nihilist take on it, that we're just trying to do what we want to do and we're going to say or do whatever it takes to get it done. It's a very dangerous perspective on government, particularly given that there's so many politicians out there who forever, even now, will talk about, well, we don't want government to mess with us and we don't trust government. Well, here you go right now. From the news perspective, reporters always trust but verify. We always report on what someone says, and then we get another perspective, and we prove it up. So for the press, a lot of this isn't too tough for us. The instinct is there. The challenge is in demonstrating to a readership how things are different without coming with while still maintaining proper bounds of how about we talk about it. And on the opinion section, I've never worked on the news side of operations. I've always been an opinion journalist.
Right.
So it's always very easy for me to say this politician is bad and they're doing bad things and you shouldn't like them.
Right.
Because I've done that about a lot of people. The problem is that folks will often say, like, politicians are bad and I don't trust them. Like, okay, good. We're in agreement. And I'd say, yeah, what about this one? Like, well, that's a good one. Why are you being biased against them? Like, no, you have to have this consistency against all politicians. And I think the healthiest thing I would encourage people to do is to sort yourself not by political party or by politician, but by policy. Find like a few core things you really like and care about, and figure out who the people are out there who work on those things. And you will find yourself likely self-sorted into one party or another. But when things change, you need to remain consistent on the things that you care about.
Right.
And you have to be unyielding in that. The politics is means, not an ends. And you should care about getting the ends you want. That you care about absent the larger political system. A question I often ask politicians when we get to interview them as part of the endorsement process is, if you had a magic wand and you could pass any law you wanted, change anything, what would you do? And it's fascinating how many politicians just never thought of that before. Because for many of them, it's not about policy. It is about being a politician. And being a politician is a job, and it's a hard job. And I hate it when people say, well, I'm not a politician. If you're running, you're a politician.
Yeah.
And you'd be able to balance different interests and understand policy and work through systems. But you're doing all of this for a reason. What is that reason? What is it that you want to happen? And as an individual who doesn't have to be a politician, you should know what it is that you want. And if you don't know what it is that you want, then it's going to be very easy for someone else to come down and lead you around by your nose and get you to want the thing that they want. And so no matter how big or small that thing is, you should think about what is it that you as an individual want to happen, and then how can you help make that happen through our representative governmental processes.
Right. I think I had an experience that speaks to that. A number of years ago, Baker Institute was asked to convene a meeting of energy folks. And when you get, 5 oil companies in a room, it's always like, someone, thinking about monopolists, collusion. So there's all that. It's just always a reality. It's
right.
Like, we have 5 of the largest energy companies in the world sitting here right now. But we convened something for Congress. Secretary Baker was always willing to have people use his house on the Rice campus as actually his dirty old attic up in the top, the dusty attic and stuff, which was fascinating. It was a dusty attic of amazingly interesting things. But the member who convened it, who was a member of the Homeland Security Committee for a long time, you probably know who I'm talking about, has a large district that runs maybe from Houston to Austin.
Used to.
Yeah, and is leaving soon. And it wasn't he who said it, but it was his staffer who was running the visit to meet with. It was the member meeting oil companies about kind of non-traditional security problems for the energy industry, terrorism, cyber, other things. And the chief of staff at the end of it, thanked me. He's like, "We really appreciate this." And I said, "Did you get what you wanted out of it?" And he said, "Yeah, it was really important that the member was seen hearing the problem." And it just struck me as not hearing the problem, but that he was seen to be hearing the problem was the punto clave, the important part.
He had to do the politics. He had to show these people that he was doing the thing.
Right.
And not just doing the thing.
Right. Because as far as I know, absolutely nothing came out of the meeting. Like, just zero.
But I think it's even worse now than it used to be, because there's this expectation that politicians are content creators. And the most important thing you do is be seen by voters of the larger populace over social media. And anecdotally, I'm hearing just about the number of staffers in Congress shifting from policy staff to comm staff, because that is what these elected officials need. And politicians do not get punished or rewarded on the basis of whether they do a good job at being a representative, for example. And I look at Dan Crenshaw losing as a perfect example of that. By all measures, he was a very good representative, delivered for his district in specific ways, while also being that bridge to larger national and international issues, specifically this focus on I think cartels in Mexico, which is something important to Houston, but important nationally.
Right.
And he had military background on that, and he spoke Spanish. Like, he was the guy.
Yeah.
He's the sort of person you want to be your representative. But for reasons I still don't entirely understand, there's a core base of the Republican Party that decided this guy who used to be like the rising star of the right was not their man anymore.
Yeah.
And they kicked him out for someone who is distinctly more of a huckster, who has voted against his own district's interests in the legislature in many ways. And so I am here just struggling to understand that.
Right.
And it is distressing.
It is distressing. I taught Dan Crenshaw, one of his staff chiefs. And, we could have very open conversations about, and there were very few whammies on the conversation, like can't talk about that. It was always, this is the members' belief on this issue.
Right.
This is the way they want to go. And you're right. Somehow, someone, a Navy SEAL, decorated veteran, the kind of person Americans, especially Texans, love to vote for, could become the enemy. And this is fear. This creates an atmosphere that I really fear. I have time for one more quick thing. And it's very much Victoria kind of prompted me on this. And I'm just genuinely curious. How is AI changing the paper?
That is a very good question, and I'll let you know when we get an answer.
Okay.
But we've seen at a personal level, I have found AI very useful for like 2 or 3 things. One of them is to do grammar checking. It is pretty effective at making sure everything's in proper AP style. And rather than me having to look up every little thing, I can run a piece through and say, like, identify all of the like AP style errors in this. I'm like, oh, you didn't capitalize Congress and you should have capitalized. Like, oh, thanks for catching that. Spell check wouldn't have done that. Grammar check wouldn't have done that.
Right.
You can do that.
Right.
I also use it for help creating SEO optimized headlines, because in my mind, it is one algorithm talking to another algorithm, and it would do a better job at that than I would. I also use it for research. It's very good. I found Google's ability to find information older than a week or specific data points to be lacking, and I found that AI is very good at that, so it's good for fact checking as well. There are times when I've gotten submitted stuff that is written by AI, and it is very bad.
Yes.
There's times I've gotten stuff written by AI, and I can tell it's AI, but it's not bad. And I find myself torn on this moral quandary of, you haven't told me it's AI. I think I can tell it's AI, but like I'm not writing it, and I'm not purporting to have written it. You are purporting to have written it. At what point does my kind of moral obligation come in and say, what does it mean? Particularly given that this entire industry has relied on ghostwriters for decades, if not centuries. This is just another sort of ghostwriter. I've experimented with AI in terms of helping with edits or writing to see what it can do. I feel like it is not there yet. And no matter what happens, we're probably still going to need human intervention. But it seems like there's a lot of opportunity. We also use AI for transcribing, which is very helpful.
Oh, my gosh.
There are so many municipal meetings that happen across this region, so many podcasts that elected officials do that you cannot listen to them all. But we can get at least written transcripts of it to try to get through it. And I think there's a lot of increasing work to try to find ways to use AI to track public meetings and send out alerts when something happens that needs someone to come look at it. So we're looking at this as a new tool. I think that there's the sense out of Silicon Valley that AI is going to be like the brain god machine that will control our lives, and we will like all have to be in service of or something. And my understanding is that if you look at China, it's more of a sense of how can we use this new tool to make our processes better and more efficient and more effective. And I think what you're seeing in journalism is more of that mentality of how can we use this to help us do our jobs better, while still recognizing that there is a role that humanity plays in a lot of this, particularly given judgment calls about what is newsworthy and what is not, and what is it that we should be writing and editing and what is not.
a fantastic answer to a very open question. I think that's about our time for today. We thank you very much for coming to the University of Houston, the Byzantine campus that can be navigated with several GPS devices, maybe.
It's a Houston. It's a big, sprawling Houston in miniature.
Yes. We have grass and trees, but we also have lots of buildings and sidewalks. The sidewalks are unique to us.
There's a lot of parking lots.
And a lot of parking lots. And now it's parking ramps. We had a serious conversation when we were told that we would have to teach our foreign students face-to-face during the pandemic. I started mapping out parking garage ramps where we could teach.
Oh.
Because Rice put up tents because Rice didn't have enough garages.
Right.
But we had all these covered places, and we said we can do floor after floor of classroom in these things and have a breeze anytime.
Yeah.
And when it rains, no big deal. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
I hope we can see you again, maybe closer to election time.
Absolutely. I'd love to.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you for listening. This podcast represents the views of the guests and not of the University of Houston. The Center for Student Media provided sound and engineering support, and Soundcast Music provided the podcast song. The series is produced by the Communications and Marketing team at the Hobby School of Public Affairs. For more information on Hobby Talks, including past and upcoming episodes, visit uh.edu/hobby/hobbytalks.